What is going on, everybody? I am back from vacation. I had a wonderful week away in Disney with my family. Appreciate y'all's patience with me. Shout out to the Steelers for not making any crazy moves while I was away. It's much appreciated. We do have some news to talk about today, though. Safety DeShon Elliott signs a 2-year extension with Pittsburgh. Reports are that's over 12.5 million, a little over 9 million guaranteed. I do want to talk just about Elliott, his season last year, what this extension means, just about that whole ordeal. TJ Watt's like contract holdout, which I guess was like really the only notable thing that happened while I was away. Not that the holdout was new, but just that he didn't report to minicamp, which I'm not really sure is like, even worth discussing on that. On that note, but then just a broader conversation about where the team stands with the salary cap. I always think that this is a good time, this kind of dead period after minicamp, before training camp, kind of look at the finances of the team and kind of talk through that stuff. But just before we get started, again, make sure you like the video, subscribe, drop me a comment. All that stuff's greatly appreciated by me. But like I said, Elliott's new contract, not officially on the books yet, but based on the reports, it's going to make him about the 30th highest paid safety in the league. Man, that's totally fine value for a player like this, in my opinion. I'm a big fan of this move. This was one of the better box safeties in the league last year. I thought this was really, a really nice signing by Omar Khan last year in free agency that really paid off immediate dividends. I'm just really happy to reward a player really respected in the locker room. I've never heard a bad thing about DeShon from that perspective. And just generally speaking, I'm always a big fan of like trying to keep continuity in the secondary, just because I believe that helps kind of the rapport on the back end, and hopefully that'll lead to less communication errors as a unit with those guys moving forward, playing together for a little bit longer. But you just look at some of the numbers. Elliott was a guy that I do the post game recaps, on YouTube, but I also like write my do's and duds column for Steelers Now, and I feel like Elliott was dang near on there every single week just because of how consistent he was. That was something I really appreciated. It was just every week you know exactly what you were getting from him. But last year, definitely a career year from a statistical standpoint. Just want to go through some of the numbers. I mean, 31 stops in the regular season last year. That was 10th most at his position, according to PFF. Really, all a stop is like they constitute that as unsuccessful play by the offense, right? Pretty simple. I know we talked about this a lot, but he was one of the more reliable tacklers in the NFL last year. I mean, you look at it, over 80 tackles, but only 2 misses, a 1.8% missed tackle rate, was the best in the league among safeties. That's just incredible for a defensive back in general. Really, for kind of context there, I always say, but like for defensive backs, you kind of want something in the single digits. If you can get it under 10%, that's really where you're really happy about it. Safeties are the last line of defense. You want those guys to be reliable tacklers. Both him and Fitzpatrick were excellent last year. I think Minka was around like 4 or 5%. So just not handing out cheap yards in that manner. And I think that a sub 2% year, man, it's just like unbelievably insane. But he was obviously around the ball a lot, but I think sometimes tackles can be misleading, a misleading stat, if you will. But Elliott's numbers, I really feel like last year were absolutely legit, and one of the reasons why I thought he deserved a lot of credit for how consistent he was. Like, he just added more impact plays than some of Fitzpatrick's co-pilots that kind of preceded him. And I think that kind of shows in a number of different stats. But you look at like tackles for loss, I think he had 6. You look at tackles short of the sticks, he's top 12 in both those categories. You look at like average depth of tackle from Sports Info Solutions. He was tied for 8th among safeties last year with Budda Baker. And like Budda Baker was doing pretty much everything for Arizona, playing a lot near the line of scrimmage, kind of like Elliott was, being that 8th guy in the box, late rolling down and things like that. So he's not a guy that just like accumulated a bunch of tackles down the field. He's not like pile jumping on plays late. Like, those numbers were 100% legit. And I just think that having a guy with that size that's willing to like throw his body around in the box, willing to trigger quickly on the run. I mean, that's one of the things I appreciate about his game is like when he sees something, he's going. There's no indecisiveness. He's a guy who brings a little bit of thump as a tackler too. I always like having that in the middle of the field. So there's just a lot of elements to his game that I think make him a really good scheme fit for some of the things they want to do defensively, in Tomlin and Austin's scheme. There was a little bit of turnover production in there too. Obviously, you had the interception in I think it was a season opener against Cousins. They're in a little quarters look. He jumps the dig route, makes a pick. He strips Anthony Richardson. a game that I was in attendance for a couple weeks later against the Colts. They didn't end up winning that one, but just a really awesome hustle play from behind. But he's got enough like flexibility, enough range to where he can moonlight in center field, allow Fitzpatrick to kind of roll down as the buzz safety and some of their cover three stuff. Could play deep half, and you're not worried about like his range or anything like that. I think if I was being like really critical, I don't think he's like the best like man coverage safety in the league. I think some of the better like receiving tight ends. I know Njoku, I think, got him a couple times. Maybe who's the tight end for the Bengals? Gesicki got him a couple times, like mashed up one-on-one. So the guys can kind of flex him out to the slot. That's not really his strength. But again, that's really where I come back to all this, right? Is like Elliott's a good player. Even if he doesn't play to quite the level that he did last year from a variance standpoint, defense isn't always consistent as like offense is. But I'm not super interested in trying to like upgrade over him and invest draft capital on another safety. I'm very content with the duo that they've got back there. Hopefully Fitzpatrick kind of bounces back a little bit. The turnover production returns. They're sitting really pretty next year, and that's kind of what I wanted to take this video to do and kind of go with it, look at the finances and things like that. But also from a draft pick standpoint, they've got all their picks. They've got the extra third from Dallas with the Pickens trade. They're slated to get 4 compensatory selections too. So I would just rather use those selections to be aggressive and addressing like more premium positions. Like obviously they've got to go out and get a quarterback. That's kind of like a non-negotiable thing next spring. But you look at wide receiver, that spot opposite DK Metcalf's obviously a question mark right now, or even corner if they decide to start prioritizing that position a little bit more on the back end and add some talent opposite Joey Porter Jr. I would just rather spend those resources there than rather spending, a higher draft pick to go get maybe a safety that's even more flexible or more dynamic of a playmaker. I just think you're chasing something that's not really worth it, in my opinion. And, I think the Steelers waited a little bit on this extension. They did flirt with some safeties and throughout the draft process, kind of looked at some different guys, some different skill sets. And this was a good safety class, but overall, I'm happy with the way that things turned out and that Elliott, he was really upfront about like wanting a contract extension early in the offseason. I'm happy that he got rewarded, and this comes at a really fair value for the team. He gets some financial security. I think all in all, this is a huge success story, especially from Omar Khan's perspective, one of his better free agent moves, I feel like, so far as general manager. So huge props really all the way around. But yeah, I'm not really expecting his cap hit to change much this year. But just looking at that kind of move, it'll probably move slightly, but they're still sitting about like 18 million left in cap space. That doesn't include like the 52nd, 53rd player on the roster right now, just because of where we're at on the calendar. But they still have moves like at their disposal if they do want to make another addition late in the summer. Maybe add another pass catcher or something like that. They've got full restructure options on guys like Fitzpatrick, Highsmith, Hayward, Queen, and Freiermuth. So they haven't touched like any of those deals just because they haven't really needed to at this stage of the proceedings. They typically like to head into the season with about 10 million in cap space. That's just for obvious reasons. Injuries pop up. You got to put guys on IR. You got to go sign somebody off free agency, things like that. Or, you want a little bit of flexibility in case you do have to make a trade at the deadline, acquire some base salary, something like that. But, they look fine financially right now. The big thing right now is like what happens with TJ Watt. Another thing about like with some of those restructures, Fitzpatrick, Highsmith, Queen, Freiermuth, those like full restructures would save them about $7 million. So that's more than enough. Like if they do make a trade or, they go sign somebody like in free agency, not that there's like a ton of guys out there right now that are really interesting to me personally, they have enough move to kind of wiggle room to kind of move some things around and get those guys really on the books without doing anything too drastic. But biggest thing right now is just like what happens with TJ. Obviously, I've been very vocal about this on Twitter, but I think they drug their feet a little bit here. But I'm still confident that this is going to get done. Ultimately, I think I know that TJ wants to be in Pittsburgh. I know that they want him here. We know what the AAV is going to be, right? Like Myles Garrett, he signed in the $40 million range earlier this offseason. That's the range that we're talking about with TJ. We're really splitting hairs around that. I do think that he's going to end up being the top paid edge rusher. And I think statistically, I think a lot of those Garrett Watt wars have kind of been worn out. And I'm not really interested in talking about that, but that's really what the financial part of this is going to be. The conversation is really centered around a couple things, and like just want to go into some of the details on why there could be a holdup. Questions for me is like, is this going to be like a 3-year $124 million range deal, or is he really pursuing like another like 4-year deal for maybe like 160 or something like that? If it's 3 years, I expect it to be like just a touch over from a average per year standpoint. If it's a year longer, maybe a little bit lower or something like that. But personally, I think when you're talking about third contract guys, TJ's going to be over 30 now. it can obviously be a little bit scary, right? But there's definitely risk involved. But that's really doing business in the NFL. But I think it really comes down to the guaranteed money aspect, and that's what I would assume. No inside information, obviously. What I would assume is the holdup right now. If I had to say, that's really what matters. Are they willing to give the guarantees beyond the first year? The signing bonus. What does that money look like? How much is up front? Things like that. Last time I think it's important to note they kind of broke their precedent. The Steelers traditionally guaranteed money wise it's usually first year salary, first year base salary plus a signing bonus. That's your guarantee. Like for most positions. Now there are like the only exceptions to that before Watt, I think might have been Ben. But that's really traditionally how they've really done business. And I think Watt is definitely a guy that's been so insanely productive that you these are the guys that you want to break your precedent, break your rules for, be a little bit more flexible, obviously, to keep them happy, right? And I think that the deal is obviously aged extremely well. He's going into the last year of his contract. He's been super productive, won defensive MVP, sacks, all that stuff. But really when they broke that precedent, he had the 5th year option, which is obviously that's a guaranteed deal on that 5th year. And then they gave, really his first 2 years plus the signing bonus really were all guaranteed. So I'm sure that's really the holdup. He's probably trying to like work in some of that stuff right now and, seeing where the Steelers are going to budge, trying to come to some sort of compromise. But, right now you look at the money, they've got 85 million in cap space for next year. So minus this deal. So even if you assume, like, let's just say like his cap hit next year is going to be around like 35 million or something like that, they're still going to be sitting, top 10 ish in available cap space. That's plenty of wiggle room with Elliott signed, Watt back in the fold. They would really only have cornerback to worry about, hopefully, in terms of starters that they need to go out and find. Slay's on a 1-year stopgap deal. We'll see what happens in the slot. Beanie Bishop's kind of getting the first crack at that in OTAs, but their finances overall look really solid. And we already talked about all the draft assets and draft capital they've accumulated. So just as a whole, I feel like, we as, media content creators, analysts, whatever you want to call us, we don't do a really good job discussing the salary cap in enough detail to the point where I think it's digestible enough for like the viewers, the audience. And obviously we didn't go into incredible detail right here, but if you do have questions about the salary cap, like how things work or just any of that stuff, please drop me those in the comments. I'll definitely be glad to hit you back. But just in terms of like schedule moving forward and everything, I'm going to have a video out later this week, probably like Thursday, Friday. I do want to do the 2023 draft class kind of review. Kind of same thing that we did last year or a couple weeks ago for the rookies. I'm excited about that. I think, that's going to be interesting conversation. I already started watching a couple of the guys, mainly like Broderick, Joey, Keanu, just over the past couple of days since I've been back in Louisville. It's been really fun to get back to the tape. I am glad to be back in the swing of things in my normal routine, but I've already tried to like start getting some guests lined up over these next 6 weeks. This kind of dead period is pretty rough for content creation, but I want to make sure that I'm still giving you guys worthwhile content, not like anything, clickbait. There's just so much of that going around right now that it's honestly exhausting from a social media perspective. But I really appreciate your all's continued support and everything like that. I will see you guys here in a couple days. Enjoy the rest of your week. Peace and love.